When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today.
For their contribution in terms of broadening what we hope was a general interest to you, but also your response to that.
Princess Anne's husband has suddenly revealed Camilla's darkest secret, and this has shocked the whole world. For years, the royal family has faced scandals, whispers, and endless headlines. But nothing has ever been as shocking as this revelation. This is not just a simple scandal. It is something far darker than anyone expected. A truth hidden behind palace walls, powerful enough to shake the monarchy to its core. How would the monarchy survive such a revelation? And what does it truly mean for King Charles himself? Join us as we uncover the reason behind this revelation. The truth behind the shadows and whispers. The British royal family has always been one of the most watched families in the world, and people never seem to stop talking about them. Every event they attend, every trip they make, and every word they say is carefully looked at by the public. Yet what fascinates people most are not always the official duties or celebrations, but the stories whispered behind closed doors. For years, Camilla, now the Queen Consort, has carried with her a complicated reputation and controversies which still follows her even today. And now Princess Anne's husband, Timothy Lawrence, may know more about Camilla than many imagine. And it's about anything but a dark secret about Camilla that has been hidden away from the public, even the royal family too. This has stirred curiosity in a way that cannot easily be ignored. So, keep watching as we delve into this. When Camilla first became connected with the royal family, her presence was not welcomed by everyone. She was known as the woman who stood between Prince Charles and Princess Diana, and many people felt betrayed by the way their fairy tale love story fell apart. For a long time, Camilla carried the burden of being viewed as an outsider who damaged the image of the monarchy. Even when she married Charles and later became Queen Consort, those shadows of the past never truly disappeared. People continued to wonder what her real role was in the family, and whether she still held influence in ways that were not obvious. However, Princess Anne, on the other hand, has always been respected for her no-nonsense character. She has built a reputation as one of the hardest-working royals, and she rarely entertains gossip. Anne has managed to stay away from the scandals that often surround others in her family, and this has made her one of the most admired members of the monarchy. When she married Timothy Lawrence, a former naval officer, people saw in him the same qualities of discretion and duty. Lawrence has always preferred to stay in the background, supporting Anne quietly without drawing attention to himself. It is exactly the kind of presence that Lawrence has that has made this revelation so intriguing. Because Timothy Lawrence is not the type of man who speaks unnecessarily, and him having knowledge about Camilla's darkest secrets has caught the attention of many royal watchers. Some believe that through his marriage to Anne, he has been close enough to the inner circle of the family to see and hear things that others could not. And since Anne herself has a complicated history that connects back to Camilla, the possibility that Lawrence may know more becomes even stronger. To understand this, we need to go back to the earlier years, before Charles married Diana, and to the beginning of Camilla's journey, and see how she entered the royal picture. Camilla Shand, as she was known in her youth, grew up in a privileged background, and she moved within circles that eventually overlapped with the royals. She first met Charles in the early 1970s, and the two quickly developed a strong bond. Their relationship grew serious, but the royal family at the time did not consider Camilla a suitable match for the heir to the throne. This decision led to Charles stepping back, and Camilla eventually married Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer who also had ties to the royal family. Andrew Parker Bowles himself was not a stranger to Princess Anne. In fact, Anne and Andrew were romantically linked in the early 1970s before he married Camilla. Their relationship ended, but it left behind a connection that later placed Anne and Camilla in overlapping paths for decades. This is so important because it shows how closely tied these families have been, not just through marriages, but also through past romances. And it is in these overlapping ties that Timothy Lawrence's story quietly finds its place. As Charles went on to marry Diana in 1981, the world celebrated what seemed to be a perfect fairy tale union. But behind the public smiles, his relationship with Camilla never truly ended. Diana herself once described her marriage as being too crowded because of Camilla's presence, and this statement shaped the way the public viewed Camilla for years. The affair became one of the most talked about scandals in royal history, and when the truth could no longer be hidden, it shattered the monarchy's image. The loss of Diana in 1997 deepened these wounds, and for many, Camilla was forever tied to the heartbreak that Diana endured. It took years of careful effort and patience before the public slowly accepted Camilla's place beside Charles. By the time they married in 2005, the public opinion had softened. But it was clear that her past controversies would never fully disappear. Even today, as Queen Consort, her reputation continues to carry those shadows. Through all these years of drama, Princess Anne remained steady and respected. She was focused on her duties, and she became the symbol of stability within the family. She is never one to get swept up in gossip, but it is believed that her relationship with Camilla has always been shaped by their shared past with Andrew Parker Bowles. Anne may have moved on, but history has a way of staying present, especially within the royal family. And this background makes it easy to understand why Anne's husband, Timothy Lawrence, might be aware of what this revelation of Camilla's dark secret might mean to his wife and the entire royal family. Timothy Lawrence's personality is very different from the flamboyant figures we often see in the royal family. He is calm, disciplined, and private. His years of service in the Navy taught him to be careful with information and to respect loyalty above everything else. These qualities made him the perfect partner for Anne, and together they built a marriage that has remained strong and scandal-free. Yet it is this very position, being close to Anne and quietly present during family events, that has placed him in a position to see and hear things others may have missed. Stay tuned as we delve more into this, because the most shocking part of all this is yet to come. Timothy Lawrence's revelation and Camilla's true nature. Timothy Lawrence had always been the kind of man who noticed details. Years in the Navy had trained him to read people, to pick up on small gestures, and to understand the weight of words that others might dismiss. Within the royal family, his calm presence often went unnoticed, but that was exactly what gave him the ability to see what others overlooked. And in Camilla, he saw patterns that made Anne uneasy. At first, these were small things, moments that could easily be brushed aside, but when put together, they began to reveal a picture that troubled him deeply. One of the earliest signs came during the planning of a major royal event. When Anne came home complaining to Timothy about being brushed off the guest list by Camilla and how the guest was being discussed without her. However, while this may have been focused on protocol and tradition, Camilla's comments also cut differently. She would make a few comments to Charles, speaking in a way that sounded casual yet sharp in meaning. She would say things like, "Anne is so busy with her horses and charities. She does not understand the pressures of real leadership like we do." This struck Timothy as an unnecessary jab. Princess Anne had been the backbone of royal duties for decades. Yet here was Camilla, reducing her value in a single remark. To Timothy, it felt less like an observation and more like a deliberate attempt to undermine Anne's standing. And Camilla did not stop with Anne. To courtiers, she would quietly confide her worries about Prince William. She would suggest that William was too modern, that his way of approaching royal life might be dangerous for the stability of the monarchy. At first, these seemed like passing comments, but Timothy began to notice a pattern. Every remark seemed to plant doubt. Every whisper seemed aimed at creating divisions, so that Camilla appeared to be the only reliable ally by the king's side. As Timothy reflected on this, he began to see how carefully such words could shape perceptions. Alone, they might seem harmless, but when repeated, when spread, or when woven into conversations across the palace, they could poison relationships. He saw this as a slow and deliberate act, as if Camilla was securing her place not only beside Charles, but above everyone else in the family. The pattern became even clearer when Timothy turned his attention to the media. He had long known that headlines could be shaped, and that the press often leaned toward whichever story captured the public's eye. But around Camilla, something seemed different. He noticed glowing headlines that praised her strength and her leadership. Articles described her as the Queen holding the monarchy together and the steady force behind King Charles. What disturbed him was not the praise itself, but the way it ignored the decades of service given by Anne and the growing responsibilities carried by William and Kate. It was as if Camilla's allies in the media were rewriting the story of the monarchy, placing her at the center and pushing others to the margins. To Timothy, this was not coincidence. It looked like a deliberate campaign to elevate Camilla above the rest of the family, shaping her image as indispensable. And he knew how much this troubled Anne. She had never cared for personal glory, yet seeing her decades of dedication brushed aside in favor of flattering stories about Camilla filled her with quiet fury. Timothy, who had always been steady, could no longer ignore the weight of what he was witnessing. This was not the first time Camilla had been at the center of storms. Timothy remembered well the echoes of the past. In the late 1989, when her private phone calls with Charles were leaked in what came to be known as Tampon Gate, the public was scandalized. The intimate nature of those conversations shocked the world and cemented her reputation as the woman who had come between Charles and Diana. For years, she carried the burden of public anger. Many believed she would never recover her image, and the monarchy itself was shaken by the scandal. Timothy knew that scandals like that never truly disappeared, even when time moved on. They lingered, shaping how people looked at her, and how she had to work twice as hard to change the narrative. Her struggle for acceptance had been long and difficult. Even when she married Charles in 2005, there were debates about whether she should ever be called Queen. The late Queen herself, Elizabeth II, had made it clear for years that Camilla would be known only as Princess Consort when Charles got married to her. This reflected not just protocol, but the uneasiness many still felt about her role in the royal story. It was only much later, near the end of the Queen's reign, that she gave her public support for Camilla to be Queen Consort. To many, this was a turning point, but it did not erase decades of mistrust. Timothy, like many others, knew that such mistrust still lived in the hearts of the people, even if it was not always spoken aloud. There were also the tensions with William and Harry. After Diana's death, the relationship between Charles and his sons was fragile, and bringing Camilla into their lives was not simple. William eventually came to accept her role, though it was said to be out of duty more than affection, while Harry was often described as more distant. Timothy had observed over the years how carefully Camilla navigated these relationships, but he also noticed how narratives in the media seemed to paint her in a better light than what was whispered privately. He began to wonder if this was another example of her allies working behind the scenes to protect her image. All of these memories and observations began to weigh heavily on him. It was as though each piece, on its own, might be manageable, but when combined, they formed a heavy load of suspicion and distrust. The sharp comments about Anne, the doubts cast on William, the glowing media campaign, and the long trail of controversies all led Timothy to see Camilla in a different light. And the final piece that sealed his concerns came at Royal Ascot in 2025. The day was bright, filled with the glamour of racing horses, cheering crowds, and flashing cameras. The royal family was present, and as always, their every move was carefully watched. Yet behind the polished spectacle, Timothy noticed something that unsettled him. King Charles sat pale and frail, his energy clearly fading. It was a sight that worried many, but Camilla's focus seemed fixed elsewhere. Standing nearby, Timothy overheard her lean toward an advisor and whisper words that froze him in place. "This throne must remain in my hands forever, no matter what happens to Charles." For Timothy, those words cut deeper than any cold winter storm he had faced at sea. In that moment, he no longer saw Camilla simply as a complicated figure or a difficult in-law. He saw her as someone who might be willing to go to great lengths to protect her position, even if it meant undermining the very heart of the monarchy. The chill that ran through him was not only about what she said, but about what it meant for the future of the crown. He realized then that this was no longer about personal rivalries or family tensions. This was about the stability of the monarchy itself. Camilla's true nature, revealed in a quiet whisper, was not just a private concern. It was a revelation that could change the course of the royal family. Timothy knew he had to act fast, and so he began to search for answers. The question that haunted him was not only what he would find, but how it would reshape the monarchy for generations to come. Here's the most intriguing part, so stay tuned. Beneath the revelation and the double-edged sword. The moment Sir Timothy Lawrence heard Camilla's words at Royal Ascot, he knew it wasn't just idle gossip or a careless slip of the tongue. It felt heavier. In his years in the Navy had trained him to listen carefully to catch what others missed and to connect details that seemed unimportant at first. And what he had caught that day was the beginning of a dark truth that would soon unfold inside Buckingham Palace. Behind the gilded gates of Clarence House and Buckingham Palace, many whispers often die before they ever reach the public. The palace walls have always kept secrets, and the servants have always known when to remain silent. But this secret was unlike any other. It was Camilla's darkest and most dangerous truth, and it was too venomous to stay hidden forever. Sir Timothy realized that what he had stumbled upon was not just a passing comment, but the heart of a years-long plan. What lay before him was nothing less than a double-edged sword. On one side, it kept King Charles bound to the throne. On the other, it ensured that Camilla's grip on power would never loosen. And ever since King Charles's illness became known, his health had turned into a subject of deep concern, both inside the monarchy and among his people. He had barely ruled for 3 years before the signs of frailty began to show. Once full of energy and confidence, he soon became weary and visibly tired. When chemotherapy started, the change in him was even clearer. His voice lost its strength, his walk slowed down, and his presence felt less commanding. To the outside world, it seemed like the natural toll of an illness. People felt sympathy for him, and many prayed for his recovery. But behind the curtain, something darker was happening. It turned out that Camilla was not simply the supportive wife that people thought she was. According to the evidence later uncovered, she had been secretly pressuring the king's personal physician into a disturbing compromise. The demand was shocking. These included deliberately reducing Charles's chemotherapy dosage. The order was precise. It was not meant to kill him, but to weaken him just enough so he would never fully regain his strength. He would live long enough to be seen in public and sit on the throne, but he would remain too frail to truly rule. It was a cruel balance, one that kept him alive enough for the cameras, but weak enough for Camilla to dominate behind closed doors. The cruelty of the plan was staggering. Camilla reportedly made her intentions chillingly clear in private. "Keep him alive for the cameras, but weak for me." Those were not the words of a grieving spouse or a loyal partner. They were the words of someone calculating, someone determined to hold power no matter the cost. And for the doctor who received this demand, The choice was unbearable. Camilla did not stop at words. She allegedly threatened his career, his reputation, and even his family if he refused to comply. The doctor had little choice but to do as she said, and Charles's health began to reflect that manipulation. But weakening Charles was only the first part of Camilla's strategy. The second part struck much deeper because it targeted Princess Anne herself. For years, Anne had been one of the most respected figures in the royal family. She had built a legacy of loyalty, hard work, and independence. Her charitable funds supported hospitals, equestrian programs, and community projects that meant so much to her. These funds were not just numbers in a ledger. They represented her identity, her years of service, and the trust the late Queen had placed in her. Camilla knew this, and she reportedly set her eyes on that very legacy. Under the cover of Charles's illness, she pressured him into signing a set of power of attorney documents. At first glance, these papers looked routine, the kind of documents royals often signed to delegate responsibilities. But hidden in the fine print was a devastating reality. These papers would have transferred control of Anne's charitable funds and inherited assets directly into Camilla's hands. If they went through, Anne would not only lose her financial independence, but also the ability to continue her charitable work in the way she had always done. It was a direct attack on her identity and everything she had stood for within the royal family. Camilla reportedly manipulated Charles emotionally during this process. She played the role of the suffering spouse, insisting that securing her financial safety was his duty as a husband. For a man who was already weakened, both physically and emotionally, it was nearly impossible to resist. Riddled with guilt and worry, Charles reluctantly gave in, not realizing the deeper damage it would cause. However, the truth might never have come to light if not for the courage of one man. Edward Thompson, a low-ranking servant at Clarence House, had worked quietly in the background for years. He had seen the whispers, the threats, and the unease that surrounded Camilla's private dealings. For a long time, he stayed silent because he feared the consequences of speaking out. But when he witnessed Camilla threatening the king's doctor with words sharp as a blade, he knew he could no longer keep quiet. With his hands shaking, Edward slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and pressed record. He captured the exchange. Every chilling word, every threat, every calculated demand. It was a moment of bravery that transformed him from a common bystander into the custodian of the monarchy's survival. When Sir Timothy received the recording, he described it to confidants as feeling as being coldly punched to the heart. This was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was undeniable proof of Camilla's ambitions. And this has crossed into dangerous, even criminal territory. The discovery placed a heavy burden on his shoulders, which was the power to either shatter the monarchy or save it. Furthermore, there are situations that make Camilla's case more believable, and that's the relationships Camilla had with William and Harry. Prince Harry had never truly accepted her, and their relationship had been cold from the very beginning. In his memoir Spare, he and Prince William pleaded with their father not to marry Camilla, but he went ahead and still married her. To Harry, Camilla represented the final break between his parents. Her presence reminded him of the pain his mother, Princess Diana, had endured. Over the years, this resentment never faded. While Harry respected the monarchy as an institution, he could not look at Camilla without remembering the past. Prince William's relationship with her was more complicated. As the heir to the throne, he had to maintain a working relationship with Camilla, and at times he appeared to accept her presence. But behind that public politeness, there were cracks. William was cautious, often keeping his distance, and he reportedly never trusted her completely. He carried the weight of protecting the crown for the future, and he was aware that Camilla's growing influence could become a threat to the very stability of the monarchy. Even the late Queen Elizabeth II's relationship with Camilla had always been delicate. When Charles first introduced her, the Queen was cautious. She understood the history between Charles and Camilla, but she also knew the public's view of her was far from positive. For years, the Queen kept her distance, hesitant to bring Camilla fully into the fold of the royal family. Over time, as Charles insisted on her presence, the Queen began to allow her into more royal events, but trust never came easily. Behind the smiles and formalities, there was always an air of hesitation. Many within the palace shared this unease, quietly questioning whether Camilla could ever truly be trusted. And now it shows that those doubts were not misplaced. When Sir Timothy finally took the bold step of showing Charles the recording, it shattered him. The king listened in silence as Camilla's words filled the room, and his face grew pale. For a man who had spent decades believing in loyalty and love, it was devastating to realize that the woman he had defended and supported for so long had been plotting against him. It was not just betrayal as a husband, it was betrayal as a king. In a low voice, Charles reportedly told Timothy that the matter must remain within the family and must never be disclosed to the public. The monarchy had survived centuries by containing its storms, and even in his broken state, the king's instinct was to shield the crown from scandal. Charles became what many described as a broken king. His illness had already weakened him, but this revelation struck deeper than any physical pain. He now carried the heavy knowledge that the very person who was meant to stand by him had been his greatest enemy all along. For Timothy, for Anne, and for the entire royal family, the road ahead was uncertain. They now knew that Camilla's ambitions had gone far beyond whispers and manipulations. She had crossed into territory that threatened not just individuals, but the very soul of the crown itself. And while the truth had finally come to light, the cost of that truth was almost too heavy to bear. So what are your thoughts on this? And do you think King Charles was right to keep this within the family instead of revealing it to the public? Drop it in the comments section below. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.